On June 11, 2011, I kayaked to a small peninsula on Ellington Island in western Prince William Sound. It is a pretty spot with a nice view across to Latouche Island and has only a little bit of surge from the Gulf of Alaska on the beach. I went for a walk along the gravel and rock beach that evening and spotted 2 black oystercatchers, being somewhat secretive and quiet. Normally, they are quite raucous in their high-pitched, repetitive calls to each other, but these were silent. They were very much aware of me and seemed to want me to follow them down the beach. It dawned on me that this was likely a behavior similar to ones used by other bird species to distract intruders away from a nest site. Black oystercatcher nests are usually only slight depressions in bare rocks or gravel just above the highest tide line. No lining of moss or leaves or feathers, just the bare beach surface. But black oystercatcher eggs are extremely well camouflaged. They look just like a typical granite rock that would be found on the nesting beach. My next thought was that because I had absent-mindedly walked along the top of the beach, above the high tide line, I might have walked right over their nest and destroyed any eggs. I felt awful about that prospect and wanted to find out what was going on or had happened. I followed the oystercatchers down to the water's edge. At that point, the tide was low and still on the ebb, so there was a lot of room. The birds led me back down the beach, going up and down and sporadically sitting down in the rocks. They seemed to me to be saying, "Here's the nest, follow me here," another distraction behavior to fool predators and clueless human intruders alike, something akin to the broken wing display of nesting waterfowl. But the oystercatchers would sit in unlikely places and only for a short time, until I walked closer. Then they would get up and move along to another alleged nest site. At least they were not frantic and making a lot of noise, so I was hoping, wherever their nest was located, it was intact. Black oystercatchers feed primarily on bivalves and mollusks, like mussels and limpets in the intertidal zone. They use their substantial scissor-like bill to open mussels and pry limpets and chitons off of rocks with their bill tip. All intertidal species, and those dependent upon them, are extremely vulnerable to contamination from oil spills. As a result of the Exxon Valdez oil spill catastrophe in March 1989, it is likely that about 250,000, perhaps as many as 690,000, individual marine birds of many species were killed directly. Oil lingered much longer on the beaches than in the water column, so shoreline species were particularly affected by the spill. Black oystercatcher populations in Prince William Sound were devastated by direct contamination, the effect on their prey species of direct contamination, and the so-called cleanup efforts which scourged many beaches with high-pressure hot water and dispersants. Black oystercatcher nesting was reduced, and those nests that were established suffered a much higher disappearance of chicks. The next day I walked back to the area, this time staying out of nest site territory. The oystercatchers saw me, and after a while, one settled down in a way that indicated a real nest site, located in a likely nesting area. This time, the bird stayed put. I tried to make a note of the location and returned to my camp. The area where the nest might be located was backed on the landward side by a 3-foot berm covered by tall grass that ran parallel to the top of the beach. I came back later that day and used this cover to quietly approach where I thought the nest might be and not be seen by the oystercatchers. Both male and female oystercatchers share nest-sitting duties, and I may have caught them in a shift change, or they might have heard or seen me, but when I peeked through the grass to see if I was near the nest, they were on the move. I stayed low and remained still and quiet. They seemed to sense my presence, and there was some of the distraction behavior I had seen before, but there was some conversation between them, and ultimately one came back and settled on what was certainly the nest. There was only one egg, and although it looked like a rock, it was definitely a black oystercatcher egg. And when I left the area, there was an adult black oystercatcher still sitting on it. I wish them well.